this method is kind of more on the shadow work side of things.
Part of the process of personality expansion in the deep psychoanalytic sense is first you're a persona, or first you're nothing. Then you develop a persona, which is a way of presenting yourself in a socially acceptable way to the world. And maybe you confuse yourself with your persona. Now, you've had conversations with people on your podcast who are stiff and you can't get a dynamic conversation going. That's because they're acting out their persona. You're not really talking to them. You're talking to an act that they've constructed. It's a puppet. An act that they've constructed to make themselves socially acceptable to the world.
And sometimes it's just anxiety.
Yeah, sure, it can be anxiety too. But then often under anxious conditions, people will revert to their persona because it's a well-rehearsed set of routines and that they know is socially acceptable. Okay, so for the Jungians, the first step outside the persona was discovery of the shadow. Oh, I thought I was the good person here, but it turns out that I've got like some darkness. And you often see this with, imagine you have hyper-compassionate people who are dependent and they won't engage in conflict, so they're always oppressed. And so then when you talk to them, you find out they're really, really resentful and they have a lot of fantasies of revenge. You've got some harsh words to say, maybe to your partner. You've got some things to say to your boss. You got to spine up and say it. And that's part of incorporating that, especially aggression. So agreeable people, compassionate people don't like aggression. You want to integrate it. And if you don't, it has its own life. So that was part of it. And the shadow consists of, in part, all the things about you that you've deemed morally unacceptable and failed to develop. And so sometimes that's aggression, often. Sometimes it's sexuality, often.
So to tap into the random and spontaneous, it helps to have one of those dice that have the letters of the alphabet on each side. You roll it and start writing using words that start with the letter as much as possible. If you're writing about a specific topic, you can limit yourself to that topic and just let it rip, or just use that letter as much as possible with whatever topic you please. Create something impossible. Right? Something that literally could not happen in real life, especially as it relates to your topic. I'll read part of my warm-up for this video to give you a feel for what it could look like. I see words, millions of them pouring out of the black darkness of my unconscious, swirling and glowing with a white light that shifts and is sometimes red, sometimes black, but glowing bright all the same. It pours out into the world and cuts caverns into the ground, tearing up roads and forests, and swirling manically into the lake, creating a massive whirlpool filled with carp and bass and a heron or two. And then I see one of those carp transforming into a dragon and it flies away, leading me into a cavern inside of which there is a great hoard of treasure, but it's mostly silver, just some gold. I pour the silver like molten glass into the grail of my cup, and it is balanced. So as you might notice, this can rapidly shift into a form of shadow work. This was all stream of consciousness writing, right? Just pouring my thoughts out as they came to me, and this seems to be, well, could be my anima calling me to action, saying there's some kind of work to do in my individuation process. Your mileage may vary on this. I'll usually tear through a couple pages pretty quickly and sometimes need to keep going, but you may need more and you may need less. And you'll get a good feel for how much is best for you as you go. I would recommend going for at least 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. The next method is breaking a bad mindset. Journaling like this is great for breaking out of a bad state of mind. So if you've noticed more anxious thoughts, or you feel depression sneaking in, or if you just don't feel as confident and zealous about your future as you'd like to, journal using this method and make the focus the opposite of what you're feeling or focusing on. I've used this to break out of months of depression by journaling about my dreams, the dreams that I'd given up. I slowly took back my belief in those possibilities. And after doing this for weeks or months or whatever it was, I snapped out of it and started pursuing my dreams again. So to snap yourself out of a negative mindset, focus on those positive things. Focus on the things that you love most and that you are most excited about and most passionate about in life until you get your passion back. Then another thing you can add to this is to think of something you can do for someone that you love. Maybe that'll put a smile on their face or make them laugh or cry with joy if you really hit it out of the park. This genuine focus on others can help you pull away from self-centered self-loathing and crowd out the self-hate with love for others and for yourself as well. Because it's hard to hate yourself when you're helping or loving someone else. The proof's right there in the pudding. You're deserving of love because you're giving love. Next up, we have ideas. This method is great for writers, for comedians, YouTubers, influencers, inventors, so on and so forth. The technique is as simple as it gets. And this is Joe Rogan's method, by the way.
Let's talk about ideas for a minute. I went to a business meeting a couple years ago with one of these TV guys I was just talking about. And we go to this business meeting and, we're all on our phones and whatever. And he pulls out an old-fashioned journal that you write in. And he just starts writing. And I looked at that and I thought, in one sense, he looks like a dinosaur, but I went out and bought one. And now it's crazy how often, all I do is write ideas in it. And a lot of them I look back on now and I go, okay, that's still stupid. But other ones I look back on and go, God, I didn't know what this idea meant at the time, but 5 years later, this idea is really, I guess what I'm saying is that if you wanted to take almost like a religious view of it, God only gives you so many, write down and cherish the ideas. But there is something to that. Folks, what really is going to make you unique sometimes is the way your brain works differently than anyone's brain who's ever existed on the planet. That's valuable right there. Write down what comes out of the brain, because you
capture those things.
Yes,
because
capture
if you don't
them.
capture them, they will slip away.
And sometimes the idea isn't good until the second half arrives later.
Yeah.
Right? So idea number 1's in your book from 5 years ago. Idea number 2 that finally completes that idea arrives later. Sometimes a book filled with interesting ideas out of your individual unique head will help you later on. So write them down.
Yeah, you have
There's no
to.
downside.
I have an app on my phone where I can just, the Notes app. You ever use that?
Sure,
where
sure.
it has a little microphone.
It's filled with
I
stuff.
talk into that thing.
I do too.
And it dictates it really almost perfectly. So I'll have an idea and I'll just be driving down the road. I just press that button. I start talking into it and then I put it down. I got it. I got that one. I captured it.
Think about people who had one fantastic idea in their life and,
Yeah.
and built their whole life on it.
Yeah.
And you never know which idea that's going to be. And the guy who taught us improv in high school, really, he had a great line. He said, that part of your brain, like every part of your brain, is a muscle. And he said, the more you're thinking, okay, I got a show this Friday that I have to come up with something funny for, the better you get at it.
Yeah.
And you start looking, your brain starts looking at things and finding things. So you're almost like training it to help you now in this new endeavor. It's a very plastic sort of an approach, but it's the same thing with the ideas. One idea in your little book that you wrote down could make your life, your child. I mean, if you're Henry Ford, I mean, how many people did you employ for decades afterwards because of a good idea? I mean, our world is built on those things.
And also, like, the idea of having these ideas and the enthusiasm that comes from it, like, it starts to escalate and you start to calculate, like, oh, and I need more and I need this and maybe that, and then the motivation and the momentum of these ideas can lead to enthusiasm.
And you attract other people who can add. And
Basically, all you do, it's super simple. You just keep your notepad on you, or if you use Evernote or Google Docs like I do, just keep your phone on you like you probably already do anyways. And every time you get an idea, right? If you're a comedian, you come up with a funny bit or an interesting observation in the world, whatever it is, you jot it down in your notepad or your Evernote or Google Docs. And for shadow work, you're looking for meaningful evidence of a shadow aspect. You're looking for those telltale signs of your unconscious mind making itself known to you in your conscious state. So for example, the memory of your dreams. Yeah, let's back up for a second. I've got about 10 to 15 different examples here. So let's just go through those one by one. I've got emotional reactions. So pay attention to those strong emotional responses that you have, especially the ones that seem disproportionate to the situation. Those are indicators of shadow aspects being triggered. Projection, of course, is another big one. So paying attention to when you strongly dislike something, you have an extreme aversion to something or someone, or especially a trait in someone else that you see, that you despise, you hate, whatever it is. These traits often mirror aspects of your own shadow that you haven't acknowledged yet, that you haven't realized. And dreams, okay, we started talking about dreams, the memories of our dreams, right? You have that dream, you get up, you write it down in your dream journal or your shadow work journal. This is one of the best ways to record what's going on in your unconscious mind, right? That your dreams are a direct pathway to the unconscious. Jot those dreams down and focus on the symbolism. Focus on the symbols in those dreams. Figure out what they represent in your mind. Pay attention to the emotions, right? The fears, the desires, whatever it is, and the narratives that they present, the patterns that you can detect in those dreams. It can really lead to a lot of self-discovery, a lot of the gold, so to speak, in the shadow. And on a similar note, you have fantasies, daydreams, right? Those can reveal a lot about your inner desires and fears as well, and it can really point to the unconscious mind and help you figure out what's going on there. Take a note of recurring themes or characters in your fantasies, and of course, as always, symbolism and patterns. On a somewhat similar note, when we're talking about the subconscious mind, the unconscious, we have the Freudian slips, right? The slip of the tongue. The Freudian slips, or the accidental statements that you make, they can sometimes reveal hidden thoughts or feelings. Those are great to pay attention to. Fears and phobias are another. Right? Especially those deep-seated fears or irrational phobias. They can be manifestations, of course, of your shadow. Now here's one that doesn't get talked about as much, but it's incredibly important to pay attention to, and that is bodily sensations or physical symptoms. Sometimes, I would argue that oftentimes, psychological conflict manifests as physical symptoms. Right? That could be something like a headache. It could be something more severe like an ulcer. It can be unexplained illnesses or diseases. Pay close attention to those things, especially those symptoms or physical issues that don't have a clear medical explanation. Conflicts. Interpersonal conflicts with your family, with your friends, with your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, whoever it is. Those conflicts, and especially the repetitive patterns of conflict in your various relationships, those can be indicative of shadow aspects, and those are great to write down and take note of and take apart, diagnose. Hobbies and interests, of course, the interest is massive in shadow work. Paying close attention to what captures your interest, captures your imagination, right? And of course, what you're interested in oftentimes leads and does lead to your pastimes, your hobbies, right? So observe those things, analyze those things, and especially those things that you feel the most passionate about, right? The things that you're deeply interested in and you just can't get out of your mind. You'll daydream about for hours, whatever it is. And especially as well, those things that you avoid, the interests that you kind of repress a little bit, despite the fact that you're intensely curious about those things. That can provide deep insight into your shadow. Another great one is moral dilemmas, right? So the situations where you feel torn between two moral choices, those clearly highlight a shadow aspect related to values, of course, and ethics. Just generally speaking, recurring patterns and habits, right? The patterns in your behavior, especially the ones that you wish to change, right? Those habits that you have that you just don't want to have, but you find it incredibly difficult to break those habits. Those are typically connected to shadow elements. And then, of course, we've talked a lot about creativity and artistic expression, your creations, right? Whether it's your paintings, your sculptures, your writing, your music, whatever it is, those are filled oftentimes with shadow material, can point directly sometimes to shadow aspects that you can figure out and realize and take care of. And then we have attractions, and on the opposite end of the spectrum, aversions. The things that you are passionate about, especially. Those are the biggest ones. Your passionate dislikes, the things that you absolutely hate, the things you absolutely despise, and then on the other side of things, the things that you're just absolutely in love with. Those clearly point to shadow aspects, or I shouldn't say clearly point to, oftentimes point to shadow aspects, especially those negative ones that are oftentimes repressed into your shadow and just bubble up violently at times. It can even take control of your psyche if it's a strong enough shadow trait. And then last but not least, we have body language. Your body can express, and oftentimes does express, what your conscious mind is not aware of. So pay attention to the physical habits that you have, your nervous habits, your postures, your body language, the gestures that you're making. Pay attention to those in the moment whenever you can. And if you catch something, maybe when you're around a certain person, all of a sudden your head's held high and your shoulder is back. You're carrying yourself kind of in maybe the way that a cat would puff itself up when it sees a dog. What is that telling you? You know what I mean? Those sorts of things, right? Pay close attention to those things, and when you get the chance, write them down so that you can keep track of those patterns and you can analyze them when you have the time to. All these things can reveal a lot about yourself. It leads to some intense self-discovery if you do it right, and ultimately the realization of your shadow. And that's it. And basically what you do is you just refer back to this on a regular basis. Maybe you, at the end of the week or at the end of every day, you check your list, check your journal and see what you have. And when you need new material as a comedian or a writer, you just go back through it and until you stumble across, one of the better gems and flesh it out. And for the shadow aspects you identify, analyze them. Connect the dots between the recurring patterns you find, and interpret the symbols you see. Find out what Carl Jung said about those symbols, what the typical Jungian interpretation of those symbols is, and see if there are any parallels between those symbols that you're seeing in your life and the common symbols in the Bible. And find out what those symbols mean, as well as the archetypes that you see in ancient stories and legends. Weigh the evidence to determine what yourself is telling you and try to figure out what issues, what complexes your symptoms point to. So last but not least, we have daily reflections. And this is one of my favorite forms of journaling, but it's also the one that I'm worst at. I've taken from a lot of other people's daily reflections, sort of journals or exercises. And so I can give you the questions that I've gleaned over time. It's kind of mine in a way, but not really. So daily reflections, I love them, but I could be better at them. But what I do is I pair those with morning intent. I'm actually very good at this. Morning intent journaling, of course, happens at the very start of the day, and daily reflections is at the end. And so the way that morning focus goes is at the very beginning of the day, as soon as I peel myself off of my bed, I set the intention for the day, right? Or sometimes after I've finished my workout. And that intent is either A, something that I feel should be my focus for the day, just based off of intuition, or B, I use 3 or a combination of 1 or 2 of these questions from Immanuel Kant. These are Immanuel Kant's fundamental questions. But ultimately, what I'm after here is my focus for the day. Oftentimes a singular focus with, some subcategories, so to speak, or side quests, whatever you want to call them. Oftentimes I'll have more than one focus, maybe up to 3 main focuses, but having more than 3 main focuses is kind of difficult for me, at least, so that's what I do. And these questions, if you don't know much about them, they're basically Kant's 3 fundamental questions that are central to his philosophical inquiry. And they are, what can I know? What should I do? And what may I hope? Right? What can I know addresses the limits and capacity of human knowledge and understanding. It's the central theme in Kant's critique of pure reason. And in that, he investigates the nature and boundaries of human cognition, differentiating between what can be known through experience, which is phenomena, and things as they are in themselves, which is noumena, which he argues are beyond our comprehension. The question, what should I do, is at the heart of moral and ethical inquiry, which is a major focus in his critique of practical reason, where he explores the nature of morality, proposing that moral actions are those performed out of duty and governed by categorical imperative, a universal moral law that is binding in all circumstances. And last but not least, what may I hope, right? And when I think of the word hope, I think of the coined Greek word in the New Testament, elpis, which is the name of a Greek, not goddess, but the Greek spirit of hope. Elpis was a personification of the spirit of hope. She was depicted as a young woman, oftentimes carrying flowers or a cornucopia, symbolizing the optimism and expectation of good things to come. So yeah, elpis literally means to expect or to confidently expect. That's the way I like to use the word hope. I find our modern English word hope a little bit wishy-washy. It's usually used in a statement like, well, I don't know, I hope so, or yeah, well, hopefully, you know, that sort of thing. So what may I confidently expect? I like to just switch it to that completely oftentimes, or at least understand that's what I mean when I use the word hope. By the way, a quick story on that subject. One of the most powerful myths to survive the test of time is the Greek myth of Pandora's box, which contains an inspiring message about true hope, right? Not the wishy-washy hope, true hope. Pandora's box, which, by the way, is mistranslation. It's not a box, it's actually a clay jar that she receives from Zeus. And that makes a lot more sense because the jar represents humanity, the human. And we see this in the Bible as well. Paul uses the metaphor of jars of clay to describe human beings, and Isaiah and Jeremiah also use jars of clay to represent humanity. So anyways, she gets the jar, and her curiosity, which is a form of desire, of course, gets a hold of her. And she can't help but opening that jar. This is analogous to the Buddhist idea that desire is the root of all suffering, and the Christian idea that sinful desire is the root of all evil and suffering and ultimately death in the world. As Eve's desire for the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and Adam's participation as well brought those things into the world. Also, James talks about how the human's evil desire leads to sin and death. So yeah, she opens the jar and diseases, hardships, poverty, suffering, and all sorts of evil escape into the world to torment humanity forever. But glimmering inside of the box, caught on the lid, is one last spirit, the spirit of elpis, hope. Pandora closes the jar with this spirit still inside of it. So this story is basically saying there are all of these evil things outside of us in the world that plague humanity, that test us, that wage war against us. But inside these living jars of clay that we still hold a powerful force to combat those things. And that is, of course, the spirit of hope, the spirit of elpis, the spirit of confident expectation. And this question ties into Kant's discussions on religion, freedom, immortality, stuff like that. He deals with those primarily in Critique of Judgment and, well, a bunch of other writings as well. But he considers the implications of moral life on issues like the afterlife and divine justice, arguing that while we cannot know these things with certainty, we can have rational hope in them. It's pretty interesting. I like Kant. So anyways, these questions are great because they help you address the key issues concerning your existence, right? Your understanding of the world, how you conduct yourself within it, and how you aim for higher things, how you pursue higher aspirations and hopes. They basically help you ground this heady, abstract realm of philosophy in the tangible, in our home here on earth, right? Basically allowing you to make philosophy not just a theoretical thing, but a practical thing. addressing the real concerns of human life. So that's why I like those 3 questions from Kant. And they're very, very helpful in setting your intent in the morning. And then for the daily reflections at the end of the day. Okay, so here are the journaling prompts for this technique. When you're looking back over your day, ask yourself and answer these questions. How would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 on your focus? And I like to choose around 2 or 3 things to focus on, but it can be helpful to start with just one. Sometimes I need to just focus on one. But you're going to choose something to be good at, basically, right? So you're choosing discipline, maybe you want to work on your courage or the level of peace that you have throughout the day, and you choose that one thing or those 2 things or those 3 things that you want to focus on, and at the end of the day you're asking this question: how would you rate yourself on how well you did pursuing that courage, that positive self-talk, that worthiness, like what we discussed earlier in the video. Next question is, what are you most proud of today? Or what is the thing that you did that you are most proud of today? Another question is, what would you do better next time? What are the 3 things that you're most grateful for today? And this is the most cliche question in the world, but might be the most important. It's one of the most important on this list, easily, because gratitude, man, you can hear it all day, every day, and just think it's the worst cliche in the world. Or, maybe if you just pay attention to it. Like, I'm speaking to myself here, because for the longest time, I just didn't pay any attention to it. Even though I knew, in the back of my mind, I knew gratitude is important. But finally, after who knows how many years, I heard it on the radio or in a YouTube video or something, and I said, well, you know what? It's obviously true. Why don't I actually do this? And so I started practicing gratitude every day, and it's the real deal. It makes a big, big difference. Gratitude is so, so important. And so I heavily encourage you to try that out. Try gratitude. Try this exercise of gratitude, and listing out the 3 things. And a lot of people will do the 5 things or the 10 things or the 20 things. I like to start out small. 3 3 things that you're grateful for. I think that's more than enough to start with. But work your way up. Nothing wrong with getting more and more grateful over time. What did I learn today? This is another great question. What lessons did life give you? What excited you the most today? What drained your energy? As an introvert, 9 times out of 10, if I've gone out and hung out with friends, it's going to be, people. People drain you as an introvert. It is what it is. As an extrovert, it might be something more like that deep analytical thinking that you had to go through at work today, or whatever it is. And that's it. Those are the daily reflections prompts. This is an amazing method that I need to be better at. I'm going to get back on this daily reflections journaling, because it really is incredibly, incredibly helpful. And those are the methods. That's all I have for you for today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.